making promises, okay? Here, I would say my hopes, and I say this publicly, I say it privately. So one of the examples I'll give you would be a much closer working relationship with Canada. And also because you have a new government that actually wants to work with us. And so Canada in the past has been one of the nations that's taken the United Nations seriously. And when Lloyd Axworthy was foreign minister, he created this incredible international movement around landmines that led to the passage of the International Landmine Treaty. Bill Clinton supported the effort, although ultimately we couldn't approve the treaty at home, but we abide by it. Now, that Canadian tradition of strengthening and using the UN is something I would love to see happen with your new government, and it's something that Mrs. Clinton's government would respond to, and in which we would welcome Canadian initiatives. And I'll just give you one example, because Lloyd Axworthy is still working on the issue of what's called responsibility to protect. It's the official doctrine of the UN that in a case like a failed state like Libya or Syria, there is a responsibility of the international community to protect those people. But it doesn't have the actual capability to make good on that promise. So then the question is, if you believed in that doctrine, how would you strengthen the UN? You know, would you create a cadre of experts to help nations rebuild? Would you actually have a robust peacekeeping force so that you wouldn't ask American troops or NATO troops to do it all the time? Now, that would be a really interesting, to me, initiative that we could do with Canada. The next area is China. And I know, Canada's been cozying up to China recently, looking for trade and business, but, the problem is the Chinese government not run by good guys. I was in China last month. I've been asked to give some lectures at universities. The academic officials had arranged it with our consulate. When I got there, my lectures were all canceled by the security authorities. And the theory was they didn't want some former American ambassador discussing elections with undergraduates. And I was allowed to have one seminar at a think tank with 12 people only. So, there are challenges to do with China, but there are areas where we could actually cooperate. One is in economic development, especially China's put forward this whole idea of a new Silk Road, three-belt strategy. And instead of criticizing or opposing it, which is what the Obama administration did, the Obama administration also opposed China's initiative for an Asian infrastructure bank. And Canada's, of course, signed up, so is the UK. I think we should embrace those kinds of economic initiatives and find areas where we can work with China, at the same time being realistic about the power of the Communist Party. So that's another area where we could talk more with Canada and figure out some common approaches. I think Mrs. Clinton's going to take diplomacy even more seriously than President Obama. He pulled off some neat diplomatic tricks, like the back channels he used with the Pope and meetings that he held in Ottawa to create the opening with Cuba. But he didn't really make good use of our ambassadors. The ambassadors he appointed a lot of big fundraisers who are nice people, but not, with a few exceptions, terribly effective diplomats. I think Mrs. Clinton, having been Secretary of State, is going to take a little more seriously who she puts out as what we call assertive diplomacy, so that you see American diplomats using all the different tools of diplomacy, not just military power, to go after all these problems. So that's my hope, I can't promise you. I think the fact that she's been Secretary of State and been to over 100 countries means she understands the world's problems, even if she knows a lot of the answers aren't easy. The other thing is, the big thing she tried to do as Secretary of State was to promote women around the world and to raise up women. And I think you would see a lot more of that very specifically from her as president. So those would be just some of the differences. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. One of the things I'm having some wonderment or even at times struggle is, what does this election campaign reflect about the American population? I'm also a bit conscious of the seemingly maybe negativity of such a hold, and I think it even precedes the election, and in part, depending how you view Trump, you're saying maybe near 40%, and that may go down when it actually comes to vote, but even large numbers of people coming out for his rallies, which are relatively small to the country's population. But what is going on in the United States that there is this type of embrace, even though there's been many moments of, let's say, things that can disconcert one, or as you put, I can't remember your words, but it's also how his ideas are presented. And I'm not pro-Trump, but I think maybe some of the discussions on, what's happening with illegal immigration, or what about the trade deals? Is this something maybe are we hurting ourselves? That one can look at that in a constructive way, and does that have determination when you do the TPP or any other kind of thing? So there can be a practical way, but there seems to be this ugliness that accompanies these thoughts. And I'm just kind of thinking, the other thing that maybe you always hear sometimes in Canadian elections and universal elections, it's the economy. The economy's doing well, you can kind of accept things. And if I understand, since the 2008 financial crisis with 2 terms under Obama, generally more people have gotten jobs, the economy has maybe done an incremental improvement, but it's generally been job growth. And in some ways that would be, the economy's good, things are doing better. I know it hasn't been as broad scale, maybe not a perfect thing. So that's a context you think might have softened some of these things for Trump. Any thoughts, what does it say about America that there is this kind of to some degree, an acceptance of these ideas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first 2 things. One, I don't think it's only America. And as I kind of suggested with the Brexit vote, I mean, we were in England a few weeks before the Brexit vote, and I did this really scientific survey and asked 4 cab drivers, and they were all for leaving. But what was interesting to me is they all repeated, almost word for word, Boris Johnson, now foreign minister at the time, he was the Trump of Brexit, his arguments, which they were kind of Trump-like because they sounded very plausible. They weren't actually true, but they sounded right. Like, we send 400 million pounds a week to the EU. If we leave the EU, we'll put all that into our national health care. It sounded, anyway, and I said, well, as soon as I heard that, I said, it's going to pass. So Hungary, which I mentioned, strong nationalist, kind of right-wing, anti-immigrant government. Even progressive Finland has true Finns now, nationalists, concerned about immigration. So I would say there is a global concern about globalization and about is it hype? I mean, there's a really interesting economist named Danny Roderick at Harvard who uses the term hyper-globalization, that this has all happened too fast, that it is out of control. We certainly know it was out of control with the financial meltdown in 2008, 2009, and that people like a certain stability in their life and their nation. And we still are a system of nations. We don't have world government. So nationalism is on the rise because people feel in some ways this hyper-globalization, is disrupting their nation and their national identity and also their economic livelihood, even though macro sense, lots of people are better off. And that's true in the United States. In a macro sense, the economy is doing very well. But there are these pockets of people in particular professions like miners. Miners are not losing because Mrs. Clinton started a war on coal. It's because we have all this natural gas. Costs less. I mean, there are economic explanations for people being hurting, but there are some people that haven't recovered from the downturn. And I think what's special about the U.S., and I tried to emphasize that clearly, is our history of slavery and race. The Civil War is not past. It's not history. It's not gone from our consciousness. We are still today. I went to a university where my residential college was named after John C. Calhoun, the president of the Confederacy. And black students had to go past these portraits of happy, slaves. Well, that's still, they're arguing today about changing the name of the college. I mean, we're in this argument, and I don't have to tell you, I just saw in the news this morning that your sports announcers are going to refuse to say the name of the mascot of the Cleveland Bleak, right? The Cleveland Indians, because, it defames indigenous people. So, but in our country, boy, race it's still an issue. We've made a lot of progress, and that's why I tried to explain what's going on. That, I think, adds this extra thing, and nobody, that's why Americans, we shouldn't think, I don't think we're like the greatest people on earth. I think we have a strong system because it does allow for change and reform, and we have, or at least our ideology of equal rights is a really good one, but trying to make good on that. So, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm also saying there's an explanation, and part of the explanation, I would say, for the extra ugliness is this reality TV development of social media, tweeting, worst thing in the whole world from my point of view. How can you communicate, with any human being? It becomes a war, or a joke, or a nasty plug, tweeting. And this is a campaign in which, one of the candidates at 3 a.m. is not thinking about how he would answer the, red phone. He's tweeting about Miss Universe. Anyway.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monica. I'm a fourth-year international relations student, actually a student of Professor Boswell. Thank you for your...
Well, you're in good hands.
Yeah, I believe so. Thank you for your very refreshing presentation. I think the U.S. election has been puzzling to many outside observers, and I want to bring your attention to one specific thing that I guess you haven't really mentioned in your presentation, and that is that I've sensed that these two candidates are being held to very different standards. Donald Trump has said and done very outrageous things, but he seems to be able to get away with all those things pretty easily. Well, if you look at Hillary Clinton, she has been struggling with this whole issue of being likable, being trustworthy, and people have questioned her trustworthiness because of the email server. She's been, I think, blamed for what Bill Clinton did, but nobody has ever mentioned the fact that, Donald Trump, for instance, has married multiple women and has cheated multiple times too, and nobody has ever questioned his trustworthiness. So is this a completely gender issue, or I guess it's just something that I find it very difficult to try to understand, because even if Hillary Clinton wins, by 60%, that means 40% of Americans will vote for Trump, and that is an outrageously huge amount of people voting for Trump. Thank you.
No, it's a good point. I tried to, suggest some aspects of that before. I think, though, what is actually interesting is that all the things you just said about Trump now are being taken more seriously.
Right.
And in fact, that is, if anything is going to prevent him from getting over 40%, or may actually just do is in fact his views women, his behavior toward women. And so that's what I meant when I said he's a very flawed messenger. And it's a very old school approach to male-female relations. And so it's going to end up actually benefiting Ms. Clinton, even though many other aspects of the campaign, as you said, she may have been held to a double standard, or she's attacked because she doesn't have stamina, whatever. But it's what we have. And it's, if we're just being objective, it's really interesting. Because, as I said, we have these huge global issues, and we have globalization and trade and economics being debated. But we now have, as you probably know, there was a woman who started this conversation, and you may, I can't remember the exact tweet title, but about people sharing their assault experiences online after, just incredible conversation going on about all, as I said, in the US, and we've been having it already, especially on campuses. So I don't think people are ignoring his behavior, who he is. It's just that many of his supporters are more angry about other things. And also, it's absolutely true that while we've had incredibly strong feminist movement and great advances of women, we've never had a woman president, and there are still a lot of people in our society who don't agree about equality of gender. That's absolutely true. And there are a lot of people in our society who still don't agree about racial equality. But a lot do. So you could say, if you look at public opinion polling, over from the 50s to now, it's an incredible shift in terms of liberalization. So it's real progress, but it's not, we're not, you know, magically become utopian society. We won't, because we're just humans, so.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first one is